Hello and welcome to Monocle on Culture. I'm Robert Bounds. This week we're arriving early, finding our seats and getting ready to take umbrage if anyone dares to shuffle or cough. Yes, that's right, we're at the theatre. Well, kind of. We might also be walking a couple of miles in the mud to find an Anthony Gormley tree and, windswept, stop there to watch an alfresco performance of Samuel Beckett. On today's show, we're looking at two very different theatrical worlds. First up, we'll sit down with the puppeteer and owner of a quite fabulous name, and that is Basil Twist. Then we'll catch up with Séan Doran, formerly the director of the English National Opera and now the artistic director of Arts Over Borders. He's leading the charge with a major new Samuel Beckett Biennale and a rather extraordinary multi-decade production of one Beckett play. First up, the 1988 film My Neighbour Totoro is a beloved, magical, fantastical film from Tokyo's Studio Ghibli. In recent years, it was adapted for the stage by playwright Tom Morton Smith, and that production has just come back to London's Gillian Lynn Theatre. There, audiences will be able to witness the technically complex, beautifully made puppets made by Basil Twist, a puppeteer who's previously worked with the Royal Ballet and Kate Bush. In My Neighbour Totoro, puppets play a central role and every cast member must manipulate them at some point in the production. The puppets and the world they create on stage is gorgeous, something to inspire childlike wonder in every member of the audience. I was delighted to be joined by Basil Twist in the studio and began by asking how he approached this project.
Totoro is iconic.
He's a legend.
He's a legend. So you approach it like, oh gosh, I better get this right. Which is different than other projects where you have sort of creative reign. This is like someone else created this character and people are passionate about him and he better meet their expectations. So you have to do it right. That's the first thing that kind of hits you about it. And I have known the director, Phelan McDermott, for a long time. So I know how he works and his deep appreciation for puppetry. And we just start playing, but you have to start somewhere with like a hunch of how you're going to do it. And what was pretty extraordinary about this project, or one of the many extraordinary things, was just as we started to launch into it, the pandemic quickly settled upon us all. And we had to work within those conditions to keep the show moving forward. And obviously, I'm from the States, so it was not easy to do an international collaboration at that moment in time. And I, like a lot of people, I moved back in with my parents in San Francisco, which is where I'm from. I mostly live in New York. But I had to keep pushing forward on the Totoro project. The Japanese wanted to know how we were going to make the title character. So I basically made one in my parents' backyard with my family because that was at the time. This was really at the high beginning of the yeah. And you could only associate with your pod, and you couldn't. I couldn't rent a space. I couldn't.
So the two daughters, the two young girls in My Neighbour Totoro, are finding their way into the world. They're getting lost. They're having adventures. They're discovering this woodland sprite called Totoro in the woods. Yeah. But you, on the other hand, were regressing. You were working out of your childhood bedroom or something.
Yeah. Although I loved being in California as opposed to New York during the pandemic.
Yeah,
it was
a little bit.
I could be outdoors. It was beautiful, and I was with my family, and they worked with me, which was a sort of a super sweetness that I know a lot of as challenging as the pandemic was, there were sweet moments for many people to slow down and be with family. And this was one of them. And it was also super appropriate to Totoro, to the spirit of Totoro, to the family in Totoro, to the sweetness of home. There was a gentleness to all of that. That was totally right. And actually, in any other project, at any other moment, I wouldn't have been able to work that way. No one would have taken me seriously if I was just going to build it with my brother and sister in the backyard. That's for my childhood.
Yeah.
But here we were doing that again. So that was really special. And that continued to show up throughout the process where we did do work here eventually in England. I had to quarantine for 2 weeks each time I came. But actually also because of the pandemic, the Barbican stage was empty and we were able to work and develop the piece on stage.
So you kind of rehearse on stage, which would not normally be the case.
But also just more rehearse, to dream, to create, to build stuff, to kind of create prototypes and mock-ups on that giant stage, which impacted how we worked and the nature of the puppets. And it was a blessing. We would never have been able to do that.
I mean, I was kind of joking about you regressing into your family. And I mean, I'm sure it was a very tender time. And as you say, that is part and parcel of, that's the vibe of the film, the vibe of the story, and the vibe of the production that you worked on here in London as well. What, as a puppet, I'm fascinated to learn about, obviously, the job of puppetry, but about the dynamics. Are you working with the director and you thinking about the dynamics of the creatures, of the bus, of all the different things that you yourself are animating, the elements of puppetry in the show? Is that what you're imagining? How fast you're moving, how many fingers and hands, and what pulleys and strings you're going to need?
Yeah, how many people? How does something get on stage and get off?
Because they're big in this production.
They're big, and actually a lot of them, as in the film, some of them make rather fleeting appearances. They just suddenly are there. And that's
not for you, they're not.
And that's almost all they do. They just sort of show up. But how do they get on stage? How do they get off? Who's doing it? What's the story of the storytelling? Like who, if you can see the puppeteers, and we're used to having that on stage, but don't just take that for granted. Why do you see them? Who are they? What's happening? And what is the clay that you can work with on stage? What are the rules that we set? What's possible?
And things like the Neko bus, the cat bus that comes. There are, and obviously the arrival of Totoro himself in the glade in the woods is a kind of an amazing totemic pivotal moment in the production.
Yeah,
these are huge creatures that you are bringing on stage. You're summoning up from backstage or from below deck, wherever they're coming from.
Yeah.
They have to have amazing element of surprise. That is a great sleight of hand or hands, I'm presuming, to be able to get this stuff, for this stuff to suddenly appear in front of the audience's eyes.
Yeah.
What are the ways in which that is done? If indeed we have the time to go into that, but I wonder generally how that's done.
I mean, it's as we were lucky in the Barbican to have that magnificent space, and now we're moving into a different space, and of course that's a change in how people.
So you're going into probably smaller circumstances on a West End stage. Right?
Yeah, we're going into a smaller space, particularly smaller backstage, but it is a slightly more intimate environment, so people are closer. The way you make things appear is out of the darkness, and so it's just a really, a delicate balance of light in the space and obscuring something and then revealing them and then finding out the ways to make them disappear. It's a bit of a illusion. I work a lot in a sort of a black velvet world, where things can disappear. So you have to bring that into that aspect into the space.
I'd like to say, I mean, this is an amazing production. And people will see it either again, or it'll be kind of more, perhaps it'll draw in a different kind of crowd in the West End, perhaps. I wanted to know I know that you, having looked up your amazing career, it reads that you are a third-generation puppeteer, that you studied in France at the École Supérieure Nationale des Arts de la Marionnette, no less.
That's right.
What is the student union like at at the École Supérieure La La La?
Well, it's a very small school, actually. There were only 12 students there when I was there, and they were mostly from around the world. So I had this really super amazing privileged experience to be at this sort of heart of the international puppetry world and met all these great puppeteers, including English puppeteers. And that experience that I had pushed me to try and do bigger and better things and greater things. I feel a responsibility to my art form because of the investment and the grace that I had in my training. And I came from my mother was a puppeteer when I was a child, actually. She's no longer, does not associate as a puppeteer anymore. doesn't identify as one, but she was, when I was a kid, she was working with some other moms. They had a little puppet troupe.
Right.
But my grandfather, her father, was a big band leader in the 30s and 40s. So he was really a musician, but he had a passion for puppets, and he used puppets as part of his act. He had puppets of other famous band leaders like Harry James and Cab Calloway. And he died before I was born. But when I was about 10 years old, my grandmother gave me all those puppets, which I still have. And that sort of sealed the deal.
Were they the materials with which you practiced? Were they the characters, or were they kind of just beautiful artifacts?
They were beautiful, kind of antique, a little bit spooky old
they can
puppets.
be spooky.
Yeah, these were definitely kind of spooky. No, I made my own puppets when I was a kid,
right.
and I, although there's a ton of incredible makers who helped me with Totoro, I made the original prototypes, which is where the ideas come from, and I like making. It's a way of thinking. I'm not someone who thinks it all out on a computer and then prints it out and says, go. I think as I build it and make it up. And then it's useful to work in cardboard and bed sheets and broomsticks and, to sort of get the general idea and move fast. That's the way that I like to work.
You've worked with amazing people, pop stars, the likes of Kate Bush. I was interested in a thing that you did called Arias with a Twist, with a friend of yours who's a drag queen.
Yeah.
And this is an amazing. These are operatic arias. And by the way, we've worked in opera, drama, Broadway, ballet at the very highest level. And obviously, Totoro is part and parcel of that. It's an amazing score from Joe Hisashi. It's obviously a beloved fairy tale as well. I suppose it's on that level. How do you? I mean, I presume the answer is you put the same into every single project that you work with. But the list of projects you've done, Basil, is as long as many people's string-assisted arms.
I've had an amazing bunch of adventures that I've fallen into. In the UK, you mentioned Kate Bush. I was working with Kate Bush, and at the same time I was working with the Royal Ballet. That was like amazing as a way to come into London and be working in London. And in both of those projects, actually, what I was doing, I was working with silk. So I have a lot of my work is more abstract, and I work a lot with fabric in terms of animating fabric and bringing it to life and sort of being a fabric or a silk whisperer. So those projects, that's really what I was doing. I was working with Phelim at the English National Opera. On Aida, I was also doing fabric, and that's when Totoro sort of showed up as needing me. And I bring that sense of kind of that respect for materials, for the materials and the life that they have within them, which is how I operate when I'm working with silk. I bring that also to when I'm working with a character like Totoro or a specific being that you're trying to create. I still am very attentive to the inner life of materials and how they show up on their own, and that we can just activate them. You don't have to force them to do anything. They actually have a quiver and a shake and a life inside them already. And I apply that across the board with all my work, but it's also true in Totoro.
That was Basil Twist, and My Neighbour Totoro is on now at the Gillian Lynn Theatre in London. Now, the playwright Samuel Beckett is one of Ireland's literary greats. A new festival organised by the organisation Arts Over Borders will celebrate his legacy in both the Republic and Northern Ireland from next year. There'll be performances in urban and rural settings, and it looks set to be a really wonderful event. Looking ahead to a Biennale in 2036 and 2038 will feature performances of Beckett's play Krapp's Last Tape, a two-hander between an actor on stage and recordings of the same character 30 years younger, played on tape. For the first time ever, this will be performed by actors with themselves recorded on tape 30 years before, a theatrical coup thought up by Séan Doran back in 2006. Here he is describing the play Krapp's Last Tape.
Now, of course, Beckett wrote it in 1958, and therefore the tape recorder was a very modern piece of technology then. But always, and never before, certainly to my knowledge, it is performed by an actor who either has recorded themselves several weeks beforehand or even a number of years, but usually being the older actor, the younger voice is in their 60s or 70s. And if you think it through, hearing the young voice and its timbres and its tones and its callowness and its embarrassment, let's say, and its hesitation or of a kind by your older self is quite a remarkable theatrical coup by Beckett. And the opening line of the text of the script, rather, it's not uttered. So on the script, setting the scene is an evening in the future. So what I chose to do back in 2006 was look up, I don't even know if Google was then, any actors that happened to be 39 there and then. And I noted that Sam West was sort of deep into his 39th year, touched base with him, and he said, I had been thinking about this myself, and it was just a month to his 40th birthday, but he went into a BBC studio and recorded the tapes parts. So also to communicate, the tapes part actually has more text than the live part. That's, even more underlining the importance of, let's say, the tapes part. Then we agreed with the BBC, because I had an experience previously about tapes disintegrating with the John Cage Trust in the 1990s. I had the noise to invite the BBC, and wonderfully they came on board to record the tapes and be custodian of them for 30 years. In case the technology changes, and to transfer them. But I think even more excitingly, if I can put it this way, in 2008, I found the actor Richard Dormer, the Irish actor, was going to be 39 on the 11th of November 2008, and he actually spent the whole day in a studio, probably very depressing for him by the time he came out that evening, to record the tapes. And what we've done now is schedule these as part of our new Beckett Biennale, which will begin in 2026. But you will be able to buy tickets for the 2036 of Sam West in Crab's Last Tape and 2038 Richard Dormer in Crab's Last Tape in the Beckett Biennale, which will be shared by Enniskillen, where we've done much Beckett previously, and Southern Ireland.
I mean, it's a mouth-watering proposition, Séan. I mean, it's a phenomenal, it's a brilliant idea, absolutely eye to eye and toe to toe with Beckett's absolutely phenomenal dramatic kind of coup de théâtre in 1958, the writing and the first production of this thing. It's an amazing, stunning, stunning idea. And it's great that you had two actors that kind of absolutely got it and leapt into a recording studio. The possibilities for pathos are off the charts with this, aren't they? I mean, it's going to be quite a moment in that first show in 2036, God willing.
God willing.
Yeah,
God willing.
I mean, it's a wonderful thing. I guess your breath can't be bated until then. But how are you kind of thinking about the staging of it? And I presume you're going to keep with the tape technology that was so new to Beckett.
Yes, no, very much. I mean, obviously, we haven't sat down in any sort of depth to envision how it would look. Although I'll confess, I am talking to the theatre where it would be world premiered. So, and those who are have got, I don't know what would you, the chutzpah or the wherewithal and the disposition of their money to buy their extremely early bird tickets on Beckett's birthday, which is April the 13th this year, for 11 and 13 years hence. We'll put the money away in an account that will gain interest, and maybe by the time we'll fund much of the festival in the interest of it gathers. So we're playing with it and playing into it as well. But it is sort of tingling to think of the arrival of a play in its purity, as Beckett envisioned it. On the page, of course. I doubt if it ever went through Beckett's mind that there would be some sort of nutty theatrical impresario somewhere who would actually look at it as an evening far into the future. But it's exciting. It's one of the many Beckett events that we're very excited now to be planning.
Yeah, I mean, I used the word forward planning, using a tautology that I imagine Beckett. I can imagine him rapping me over the knuckles with a metal ruler for using it. And also, apologies to you, Séan. I know what the answer to this is, but I want you to say it because it is such a joyful phrase. It's a festival that you have coming up in just a few weeks' time in April of this year. Maybe it's centered around Samuel Beckett's birthday. But tell us a little bit about that as well, because this is something that it can be a more immediate call to action for people who are more impatient than can wait to 2036.
Absolutely spot on. And I'll give a little tiny backstory to explain to your listeners that in 2012, we created the first annually recurring multi-arts festival in Beckett. His work at the core of it, but we were spinning off in many different directions, inviting contemporary artists of all art forms. And if you could just think for a moment, imagine me going around to local governments and funders and saying, I think the most sustainable and exciting thing that you could ever have in your small town of Enniskillen is an annual Samuel Beckett Festival. You know, the man who actually has a reputation of, emptying halls as opposed to filling them. But it has been such an extraordinary success in place and work. He went to school, you see, in Enniskillen, the Portora Royal School, as Oscar Wilde did before him. Anyhow, that festival format was wonderful across 10 years and finished its 10th anniversary in 2022. So the first baby step of ourselves coming back is in April, this April coming. 2 weekends, April the 12th and 13th, and the 13th of April is Samuel Beckett's birthday, Saturday and Sunday, and then April 18th and 19th, Good Friday, is April the 18th. So on Holy Week, Beckett used to comment when, the odd person might say to him, why is your work so glum? And he let them know that he was actually born on Friday the 13th, Good Friday, 1906. It wasn't his doing.
He had calumnus cast upon him, didn't he?
Absolutely. Born astride the grave. There you are.
Yes.
No, and so what we've come up with is the 2 weekends called Oh My God, OMG exclamation mark. And it's bringing together circling around the political and the biblical and the cultural. The political being in Northern Ireland, of course, the Good Friday Agreement. And you have Beckett, born on Good Friday, and he actually attended school technically in Northern Ireland because that was when the island was being divided in 1921 between North and South. And he was there sitting in school in Enniskillen from 1920 to 23. And cultural in that we have this walking for waiting for Godot, where we make our audience, they get on a bus and they absolutely love this punishment, and they're driven to a location near the border where they gentle walk for 2 or 3 or 4 kilometers around the mountain, up onto an upland bog where there's a small country road, and the sculptor Anthony Gormley created for us a tree for waiting for Godot. Glistens there in the bog, and they walk towards it, and 2 of the 4 actors are there waiting for them, and they sit on the curve of the road and experience what is Beckett's only outdoor play in the open air. And a refrain that we get from audiences when we did this, started in 2017, and we bring it back every year now, and it'll be part of Oh My God, is they say, we will never go to watch Waiting for Godot indoors in our life again. It has that kind of spine-tingling, unbelievable, coming together of place and words in the air. And it's one of the most exciting things that just ourselves have happened to make and come across. So we're doing it twice. We're 2 Northern Irish actors. We'll meet 2 Southern Irish actors. This is back to the Good Friday Agreement axis again on the 12th and 13th of April. And then 2 English actors will meet 2 Irish actors, East and West and North and South, the following weekend of Good Friday, April 18th and 19th. And in between, we'll take quotes from Godot, quotes such as, was I sleeping while the others suffered? And that for our time will bring a Ukrainian writer and a Palestinian writer into conversation at 3 o'clock on the Good Friday. And then at 6 o'clock, Good Friday, this April, which is the time when the Good Friday Agreement was signed in 1998, we will have 4 writers, 2 from the North, from both traditions, from either tradition, and a writer from the Republic of Ireland, Jane Clark, and Alex Clark from England, with Jan Carson and Owen McNamee in Northern Ireland. And the 4 writers will discuss the importance and the role of the arts in a post-conflict society. So what we're doing here, if you think, just to finally say, with Waiting for Godot, it is a post-conflict play written in 1948. It's a trauma. Something has happened to leave that sort of extraordinary existential place and a plot. So it's the same kind of sort of frisson to go to a place like Enniskillen in Northern Ireland post-conflict, because we're still kind of teasing our way out. There aren't the killings, there aren't the loss of life anymore, but it is nonetheless the hangover of a situation that was for nearly 40 years in conflict.
It feels like the most elemental way to understand the play itself and this sort of clash and kiss of these cultures coming together. It feels like this must be the town, the place, perhaps being the birthplace of Beckett itself. It seems like the perfect place in the world to stage this thing. I've got a picture in my head. People will know the stage set, that stark, bare stage set that usually works for Godot. It sounds amazing. After a 4-mile hike, you end up on an upland bog overlooked by a tree made by a contemporary artist. It sounds absolutely phenomenal. And how long has this been going, Séan? Is this an idea that's in its infancy?
Well, we did begin it, and we've brought it back rep style because it gets such a following. So we began it rather in 2017. So we've done a number of iterations, and there's over the years, and then obviously we weren't presenting during the COVID years. And the last time it was done was in 2022. And we're kind of, charmed by the same actors coming back. It's kind of totally in the tone of Godot. It's the same place, the same time, the same tree. But is it?
It's amazing. It's such a startling thing. And I know that before your role at Arts Over Borders, Séan, you were the artistic director at the English National Opera. Now, you might think that perhaps our audience might think there are very few similarities, but you're playing Beckett's works are so interpretable, but they are so solid somehow. And you are used to, I presume this was what you were doing at the English National Opera with playing with the canon, playing with how you stage things and interpret things and how people might see these old works with fresh eyes and ears. Is there something to that there is something concrete and kind of indissoluble about the work of Beckett that you can shine many different lights on?
Yes, I mean, it's enduring. Great work is enduring, as simple as that, and therefore it can take the sort of impact of creating a new. But I'd be one of those, I could be so open as with the idea of the Craps Last Tape in 30 years that it could be seen as a gimmick. But in truth, I am the very exact opposite person. I'm actually very anal in terms of research and detail, and I will only think to turn something on its head if I find it latent in the work itself. And it really is sitting there, even unconscious to the author, no matter, but it is there and it can be argued for afterwards why you do it. But I don't explain it or spell it out either, because I think audiences are way ahead of us in many respects and sniff and smell something of authenticity or meaningfulness. You don't have to explain, let's say.
It's wonderful stuff. And it feels, to me, at least in my ignorance, that Arts Over Borders, that a playwright like Beckett could have been made for Arts Over Borders, particularly in it working in Ireland, and the 30-year gap. Someone listening to their spool 5 from box 3, as it were, 30 years ago, there'll be some thoughtful faces and some tears in eyes. I'm imagining when everyone thinks of themselves in the position of Crab.
Yeah, that's beautiful. No, you're right. That is the key to the wonderfulness of the play. That is, being a young person and when we're all older and looking back and on the memory. We've got all that to look forward to.
Yeah. Well, before that, there is Oh My Goddo. That is in April of this year. Next year, the Biennale kicks off in 2026. And for those, we're calling them early bird tickets, 2036 and 2038. You're receiving bookings on the 13th of April for that. Am I right, Séan?
We are. We'll open bookings on April the 13th, which is Beckett's birthday, and close them on Beckett's birthday, Good Friday, April the 18th. So there is that few days windows to claim your tickets. Yeah.
He's turned into Harvey Goldsmith by the end of the interview. Séan, thank you so much for talking to us. Thank you.
A great pleasure, Rob. Thank you.
That was Séan Doran, and you can find out more about all of these events at artsoverborders.com. And that is all for this week. Monocle on Culture is produced by Sophie Monaghan-Coombs and Steph Chungu, and Steph also edits the show. Many thanks to Hunter Wang for editing help with today's episode too. We'll be back at the same time next week, but from then, from me, Robert Bounds, thank you very much for tuning in.